in the same amount of time as those men. And they said, man, this guy has so much. Action moviegoers frequently question whether the on-screen battles actually happen in real life. And few names arouse greater interest than Michael J. White and Steven Seagal. During Exit Wounds, did sparks actually fly amongst these legendary figures in martial arts? Or has the story been overblown by rumors? By separating fact from fiction, this work reveals the real tale. We will discuss production issues, Michael J. White's thoughts, on-set dynamics, and the reputations influencing the lives of both men. Was it always magic from the movie? Or might the fight have been real? Come along with us as we reveal the true cause of this conflict. Who are Michael J. and Steven Seagal? White. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, Steven Seagal established himself as one of Hollywood's most outlandish action actors. Seagal was trained in a traditional martial art, in contrast to many of his peers who had backgrounds in bodybuilding or stunting. He became the first foreigner to run a Aikido dojo in Osaka after studying the art in Japan. Rather than using strong punches or ostentatious kicks, his approach relied on joint locks, throws, and rerouting an opponent's force. Because of this, he had a distinct on-screen persona from celebrities like Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme. His actions frequently appeared serene and flowing on-screen, supporting the idea that he could take out adversaries with minimal effort. This became a point of contention among martial artists, as well as his trademark over time. His expertise was praised by some, but its usefulness outside of controlled practice was questioned by others. Stories of challenging behavior also began to surround Seagal's career. He was frequently characterized as challenging to deal with, particularly while performing stunts. Legendary judo practitioner and stuntman Gene LeBell was the subject of one of the most well-known tales. The story of LeBell choking Seagal on a movie set became viral in martial arts circles, despite disagreements over the specifics. Regardless of how accurate the narrative is, it furthered Seagal's reputation for conceit and conflicts with other martial artists. Public perception was influenced by these stories, and many in Hollywood started to view him as someone whose off-screen conduct occasionally overshadowed his on-screen abilities. Michael J. White had a completely different background when he first entered the field. From an early age, he received martial arts training and performed a variety of techniques, such as Shotokan, Goju-ryu, Taekwondo, and Kyokushin. White developed throughout a variety of styles, giving him both striking and grappling skills, in contrast to Seagal, who mostly stayed inside Aikido. Because his martial arts were more than just show, he also established himself as one of Hollywood's most credible warriors. His actual competitive background gave his action roles more legitimacy. He was able to seamlessly transition between mainstream movies and ventures that catered specifically to martial arts enthusiasts, thanks to his physical presence and technical proficiency. White began his acting career in smaller parts, until becoming well known in the late 1990s for his role in the comic book adaptation of Spawn. He gained recognition throughout time for giving battle scenes a realistic feel. His ability to execute intricate choreography without mainly depending on doubles was appreciated by directors. Supporters also appreciated that White's technique demonstrations appeared genuine rather than overdone. In a sector where many actors only studied enough to appear credible, this made him stand out. He was in high demand for roles in independent martial arts ventures as well as major motion pictures, due to his charisma and sincere talent. Eventually, these two guys reunited in the 2001 movie Exit Wounds. Andre Bartak directed the film, which starred Steven Seagal as Orrin Boyd, a gruff Detroit police officer. The narrative followed Boyd as he discovered a crooked network that included both criminals and police officers. Although many elements in the setting were altered for the screen, the movie was based on John Westerman's book of the same name. In order to appeal to both Seagal's devoted following and younger viewers who liked the fast-paced thrillers of the early 2000s, Exit Wounds blended martial arts action with urban crime drama. Exit Wounds was a significant project for Seagal. Following a run of less successful films in the late 1990s, his career had slowed down. With a more refined production and a more powerful studio push, Exit Wounds was positioned as a comeback. In comparison to his other films, the movie did well at the box office and momentarily made him a bankable action star again. For a lot of people, it was the final mainstream smash he would feature in before his career turned to direct-to-video. Michael J. White portrayed the primary adversary, Louis Strutt. Strutt was a master crook who worked in the background while others did his bidding. White created a villain who could compete with Seagal's character in the last act by bringing physical strength and ferocity to the part. Casting was done with purpose. The producers needed an opponent that appeared credible and dangerous, someone who the public would believe was a real threat to Seagal's seasoned police officer. White was ideal for that position because of his proficiency in martial arts. Viewers could perceive that his abilities were genuine and not merely the result of his work. Anticipation was raised by this combination. Action moviegoers wanted to see how White's strong and athletic method would contrast with Seagal's calculated, effective style. In addition to becoming the film's high point, the altercation between their characters set the stage for the rumors that eventually circulated about what transpired behind the scenes. In addition to being essential to the film's plot, the contrast between the seasoned veteran and the up-and-coming martial artist also represented a broader change in the action genre. As a result, when viewers discuss Steven Seagal versus Michael Jai White, they are discussing more than just a fight scene from the film. They are also discussing the actual reputations of two men whose careers reflected various action movie eras. The account of what transpired on set has become a legend in and of itself, which adds to the intrigue of the following section of the narrative. Rumor, testimony, and the reality start to blend together during the filming of their encounter and exit wounds. We need to hear firsthand from individuals involved and see behind the scenes of Hollywood choreography in order to truly comprehend the story. The struggle at the beginning. What actually took place? The eagerly anticipated fight scene between Michael J. White and Steven Seagal was meticulously prepared for action movies on the set of Exit Wounds. The goal of fight choreography is to appear dangerous without really hurting anyone. There was particular concern about how Seagal would handle a scene with someone like White, because he already had a reputation for being harsh with stunt performers. However, White subsequently clarified that Seagal did not punch him during their scenes. In spite of this notoriety, the throws, kicks, and punches were all performed precisely, while adhering to the sequence. As a result, the fight was safe and cinematic, demonstrating Seagal's ability to cooperate with a respected and skilled martial artist. Behind the cameras, however, there was a sense of unease. Because they knew of Seagal's past, the director and producers appeared wary of anything going wrong. They decided to put the fight scene at the very end of the movie's production. This implied that the production may end without requiring Seagal for further scenes, in the event of a mishap or a heated argument. What was left might be covered by stunt doubles. This tactic preserved the movie's budget and schedule, while also showing some consideration for how erratic the circumstances could develop. The tension stemmed from pride as much as from the choreography. White was younger, athletic, and well-respected for his extensive martial arts background, whereas Seagal was an experienced, older veteran who was recognized for his distinct technique. The delicate balance of respect was represented by their presence together, which represented two generations of martial artists. It's obvious that the production team sought to avoid any actual conflict that could harm one of the actors or cause the film to fail. Actor Isaiah Washington, who starred in Exit Wounds, is also involved in the plot. White then revealed that Washington might have intervened during the fight's filming to make sure things didn't go out of control. By reminding everyone that this was still a movie and not an actual martial arts battle, his presence had a calming effect. Washington's participation demonstrates how, in situations when egos and reputations may otherwise lead to confrontation, even co-stars can contribute to keeping the peace. The fight between White's Louis Strutt and Seagal's Oren Boyd lived up to the hype when viewers watched the final result. The sequence blended White's unadulterated strength and agility with Seagal's well-known control and joint locks. The crowd was gratified by witnessing the clash of two radically different combat ideologies on TV. The meticulous planning, the behind-the-scenes vigilance, and the attempts to maintain a professional demeanor were not visible to the audience. Actually, there were no off-script punches, no unruly fight, and no spectacular injuries. Instead, there was a well-orchestrated partnership between two guys, whose pictures gave the appearance of peril. Due in part to their respective reputations, and in part to the fact that people enjoy the notion of two martial artists actually testing each other, the legend of Seagal versus White arose. However, all involved a test to the fact that professionalism won out in the end. Reasons and worries. The partnership between Michael J. White and Steven Seagal in Exit Wounds provided more than just an on-screen battle between two accomplished martial artists. The production's handling of the battle scenes was influenced by actual calculations and worries behind the camera. These issues included injuries, money, reputation, and the delicate way Hollywood handles its stars, in addition to style and dance. It becomes evident why the producers were so meticulous in planning the fight between Seagal and White when one understands these reasons. Seagal's long-standing reputation for being brutal in battle choreography was the first significant reason to exercise care. Over the years, stuntmen had accused him of using excessive force while executing methods or striking too hard. The notion that Seagal would go too far persisted in the thoughts of many who worked with him, even though some of these charges were exaggerated in retellings. Every time he entered a physical scene, this made him feel unsafe. Other performers are understandably cautious when a performer has a history of leaving partners shaken or damaged. Since Michael J. White was not a stuntman hired to make Seagal look nice, the risk was increased in the case of exit wounds. He had years of actual martial arts training and was a skilled combatant in his own right. The production crew was aware that a deadly situation might have been created for both men if Seagal had pushed him too far or made a thoughtless move. White had the ability and reflexes to react, even if only intuitively. In addition to physical security, there were significant financial risks. As the main character, Seagal was essential to almost every scene in the film. The consequences would have been disastrous if he had been hurt late in the filming process. In the case of Exit Wounds, the studio had already made significant investments in marketing it as Seagal's big comeback. And delays can eat up millions of dollars from a production budget. The idea of the actor getting hurt right before the end of his scenes was a nightmare for the directors. They created a buffer by positioning the fight scene at the very end of the timetable. In the event that something went wrong, they could use stunt doubles to save the rest of the film without the whole thing falling apart. This relates to the protection of stars, a broader structure in Hollywood. Studios are aware that a movie's name is frequently used to sell it. The project as a whole may lose value if a star is hurt or unavailable. Productions therefore take great care to limit the physical risk that their best performers are exposed to. That weight is carried by stunt doubles, who execute their riskiest stunts while the actor's face is only seen in carefully timed shots. Due to demands from investors and insurance firms, studios continue to minimize exposure to significant danger, even in movies where the performers insist on taking up a large portion of the action themselves. In addition to being the main character in Exit Wounds, Seagal had a well-established on-screen presence. He needed to maintain his reputation as an almost unbeatable martial artist. That aura would be harmed if he appeared weak or if a co-star truly hurt him. White, on the other hand, contributed a very other kind of legitimacy. He was renowned for his technical skill, accuracy, and realism. The movie needed Seagal to appear in control of the fight, while simultaneously demonstrating White's actual menace in order for it to function on screen. It was a tough undertaking to strike a balance between those two images, without allowing pride or ego to cause issues. Action movies from Hollywood have always featured ego. Even when the cameras stop rolling, actors who have built their careers on their strength and expertise frequently feel pressured to maintain that image. Seagal came from a time when a star is defined by their authority and mystique. White symbolized a more recent period of authenticity and multi-martial arts training, but combining those two worlds on one stage was sure to cause conflict. In addition to choreographing a fight, the production had to choreograph respect. They had to make sure both guys left with the impression that their reputations were unharmed. And that needed just as much backstage management as it did on camera. The fight's legendary status can be attributed to this meticulous balancing act. It was more than a fictional story about two individuals fighting. Under the cautious eyes of producers who were determined to prevent catastrophe, it was also the collision of two careers, two reputations, and two approaches to martial arts. How much preparation went into safeguarding the actors, and the project itself is demonstrated by the fact that the battle was finished safely, and ended up being one of the movie's highlights. However, the story is not just about what transpired on that set. Following the shoot, Michael J. White kept thinking back on the encounter, providing perspectives that influenced how the public and Seagal's supporters perceived the band's strategy. The story gained depth from these contemplations, as well as subsequent interactions between the two men. In addition to disclosing what transpired during shooting, they also showed how the performers themselves perceived one another after the cameras stopped. Broader opinions, interviews, and analysis. Michael J. White's opinions about martial arts and their practitioners have always been candid. His remarks about Steven Seagal frequently attracted notice because they were made by someone who was truly knowledgeable about the subject. On the sidelines, White was not a critic. He had trained as a martial artist for decades and had faced Seagal in a battle scenario that required accuracy. His viewpoint was significant. White criticized Seagal's technique, saying that he was not impressed by it like he was by other fighting methods. Although Seagal had a certain grace from his Aikido training, White believed it lacked the reality that is present in arts that prepare practitioners for live opposition. He claimed that Seagal's movements were straightforward, akin to what a father may playfully display to their child. This was intended to be an honest assessment of Aikido's shortcomings, in comparison to White's striking and grappling practices, not to be disparaging. White also discussed battlefield authenticity in a more general context. He noted that a big part of Seagal's strategy was centered on stage situations, in which the opponent adhered to a predetermined script. This, in his opinion, meant that Seagal would never have to cope with someone who actually tried to hit him. Fighters in sports like mixed martial arts, kickboxing, and boxing have to respond to sudden attacks. White praised the realism, and implied that Seagal was unprepared for such a task due to his upbringing. His remarks revealed a difference between the highly competitive martial arts, practiced in sports or everyday life, and the classical martial arts utilized for presentation. Occasionally, Seagal's personality was also mentioned in White's reflections. He characterized Seagal as having a proud demeanor, sometimes more so than his abilities warranted. White promoted humility by implying that real martial arts proficiency entailed an awareness that there is always more to learn. For White's admirers, these comments aligned with his own realistic training and performance philosophy. They were particularly divisive among Seagal fans, since they questioned the band's decades-long reputation as an almost untouchable master. Years later, White recounted an instance in which Seagal personally approached him in spite of the critiques. The two met in Thailand, where this occurred. White claims that Seagal apologized in an effort to ease any tension that could have been as a result of previous comments or arguments. This revealed a new side of Seagal, one that, despite years of disagreement, valued respect for one another. The gesture was significant to White because it showed that their relationship did not have to be permanently defined by their friction. Reconciliation and criticism together provide a more complete picture of White's perception of Seagal. On the one hand, he was not afraid to call out Seagal's martial arts methods' shortcomings. However, Seagal's attempt at reconciliation, which implied that even martial artists with disparate ideologies could find common ground, was also embraced by him. The public's memory of the Exit Wounds combat was also impacted by these thoughts. It was no longer merely viewed as a staged scene, but also as a component of a larger discussion concerning ego, authenticity, and the realism of martial arts in movies. In addition to debating who was more attractive on TV, fans started talking about what each man stood for in the greater martial arts world. As a result, the fight's legacy is based on both the actors' subsequent discussions about it, as well as what was captured on camera in 2001. Seagal's later apologies demonstrated that even a famous person might take a step toward humility, while White's candor let people see Seagal's shortcomings. The Seagal against White encounter is one of the most intriguing periods in the history of contemporary action movies, myths, legends, and public opinion, because it laid the groundwork for the numerous conversations, interviews, and commentary that followed. Michael J. White and Steven Seagal's story is about more than just two Hollywood men who practice martial arts. It also provides insight into how myths and legends can develop around well-known individuals, particularly when their reputations are exaggerated. While White is frequently viewed as a grounded, disciplined martial artist who does not hesitate to speak honestly, Seagal has long been a character shrouded in mystery, myths, and inflated claims. When the two are brought up simultaneously, the discussion swiftly shifts from fact to narrative and folklore, where audiences are unable to avoid talking about the blending of truth and rumor. The story of Seagal's confrontation with renowned stuntman and judo master Gene Label is among the most enduring tales associated with him. According to legend, Seagal once asserted that he could not be rendered unconscious by strangulation. According to reports, Leal accepted the dare and choked Seagal until he passed out. Even additional details are added in certain versions of the narrative to make Seagal's situation seem more dramatic and uncomfortable. The Seagal has repeatedly refuted this story, claiming it never occurred. However, the mythology has persisted for decades despite the denial, being repeated by insiders, fans, and rumors throughout the motion picture business. This mythology is significant because it relates to the common perception of Seagal's. He is accused of exaggerating his actual fighting prowess, despite having built his career on his tough guy persona. The narrative of Jean Labelle is presented less as a historical occurrence, and more as a means for critics and admirers to speculate about the authenticity of Seagal's martial arts fame. The story always elicits additional giggling, skepticism, and discussion over whether Seagal could actually live up to the persona he portrays on TV. These kinds of anecdotes are common in Seagal fan culture. Retelling and remixing them, frequently with humor, has become commonplace in online forums. While some storytellers tend to make Seagal look foolish, others use the stories to highlight how much more formidable other martial artists, such as White, are in contrast. The tone is frequently derisive, illustrating how Seagal's reputation has changed from that of a revered martial arts celebrity to that of someone who is frequently made fun of or criticized by the public. Anecdotes from inside give this image greater credibility. Seagal has been characterized as demanding, haughty, or even cruel by many who say they have worked with him. These tales stand in stark contrast to Michael J. White, as mentioned. In addition to being acknowledged as someone who could support his martial arts credentials in real life, White is frequently characterized as a good man who is cordial with fans and considerate of coworkers. The public's perception of the two individuals is clearly divided as a result of the contrast. The discrepancy between on-screen realism and genuine martial authenticity is at the core of these perceptions. In the 1980s and 1990s, Seagal's films exposed viewers to brutal and straightforward action scenes. His Aikido-based choreography, which included enemies being flung down in a single, quick move, made fights appear precise and effective. It appeared lively and convincing to the audience. However, critics noted that Seagal's martial arts demonstrations outside of his movies seemed less realistic in terms of actual combat. Fans began to doubt his actual talent because of this discrepancy between his martial reality and his film performance. White, on the other hand, developed his career through years of training in a variety of martial arts disciplines, such as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Taekwondo, and Karate, in addition to his work in movies. He stood out as an actor who infused his roles with genuine authenticity because of his training background and demonstrations, which gave his on-screen performances weight. The disparity between Seagal's on-screen persona and White's real-life martial arts training became even more apparent to viewers who were comparing the two. Legends like the Jean Labelle choke story and fan accounts of Seagal's alleged actions are significant in the martial arts and movie industries because they influence how people perceive him. They also make it easy to draw parallels with White, who stands for the opposite of the coin in terms of discipline, humility, and shown ability. Even if these myths and tales can't always be confirmed, they still influence the story and sustain the discussion. The myths surrounding Seagal serve as a reminder that Hollywood celebrities are both characters and actors in a continuous public drama. The myths show how audiences utilize storytelling to question or validate their beliefs about their heroes, even though they may never be completely confirmed or disproven. This has meant that Seagal is fighting not just other martial artists, but also the weight of the myths that surround him. And this leads us to a pivotal moment. If the public's perception of Seagal has been influenced by myths and stories, what happens if we take away the hyperbole and examine what actually happened between him and Michael J. White? The story transitions from rumor to truth at this point, putting the actual tale together. The problem of determining what actually transpired between Michael J. White and Steven Seagal remains after all the myths, tales, and passionate anecdotes have been put aside. Although the fact is far more straightforward than the spectacular stories that critics and fans frequently tell, it is just as significant. Knowing the verified facts makes it easier to distinguish between entertainment rumors and the truth about movies and interpersonal relationships. The most important fact is that during their time together, Seagal never struck White physically. There is no proof or reliable reports that a violent altercation actually occurred, despite the conjecture and tales that circulate. Rather, what transpired was more about meticulous preparation and preventative steps in the background. There were worries about potential harm, particularly to Seagal, one of the main characters in the play. Late-stage injuries to the main actor could have caused serious issues, such as scheduling delays and expense increases. Production crews therefore took great care to safeguard Seagal and make sure that fight choreography minimized dangers. White posed no threat in terms of purpose, because of his martial arts training and physical prowess. But there is always a risk associated with the intensity of actual martial training. In order to maintain smooth operations, studios would rather manage such risk. This defensive strategy is part of a larger Hollywood custom of protecting celebrities. To avoid mishaps, well-known actors are frequently protected by stunt doubles, contingency plans, and specialized choreography. It is a financial and logistical requirement rather than a question of whether an actor is skilled. Although Seagal's reputation for using extreme physicality in his combat sequences may have made executives even more wary, maintaining uninterrupted production was ultimately the top issue. Whether it's about violence, conceit, or the beginning of a dispute, the unverified rumors that surround Seagal are just that, unverified. Although they could attract attention, they are not supported by reliable reports. The notion that Seagal's previous actions inevitably led to conflict with White appears to have been mythologized. In actuality, there is no evidence of Seagal's past roughness boiling over into actual conflict with White, even though it may have influenced expectations. The myths do highlight the ease with which exaggerations can be fueled by reputations. Every rumor has seemed more plausible, because Seagal has a history of being portrayed as a challenging character. These stories are frequently magnified by fans, who then incorporate them into a broader narrative that aligns with the prevailing public perception. For this reason, the reliability of sources is crucial. White's own statements regarding the issue are far more credible than anonymous internet stories. Even though they are harsh, his observations on Seagal are based on personal experience and are therefore a more trustworthy source of information. Realizing that there was never a major battle, no punches were exchanged, and no covert altercation occurred is necessary to synthesize the true story. What actually occurred was the meticulous balancing of safety, reputations, and egos in the intricate world of filmmaking. White's authenticity as a martial artist and Seagal's image as a rough man clashed, but only in the world of perception and criticism rather than in actuality. This is significant because it demonstrates how Hollywood narratives frequently focus more on what viewers wish to believe happened than on what actually occurred. Myths are used by both fans and critics to amuse themselves, to cast doubt on reputations, or to clarify the discrepancy between behavior on screen and behavior in real life. By carefully examining verified information and trustworthy sources, we can discover that the tale of Seagal and White is about reputations clashing rather than fists flying. How do you feel about Michael J. White and Steven Seagal's relationship? Do you believe they will ever be able to work things out? Leave a comment below with your opinions. For more fascinating tales about your favorite celebrities, don't forget to hit the notification button, like, and subscribe. Every rumor has seemed more plausible, because Seagal has a history of being portrayed as a challenging character. These stories are frequently magnified by fans, who then incorporate them into a broader narrative that aligns with the prevailing public perception. For this reason, the reliability of sources is crucial. White's own statements regarding the issue are far more credible than anonymous internet stories. Even though they are harsh, his observations on Seagal are based on personal experience and are therefore a more trustworthy source of information. Realizing that there was never a major battle, no punches were exchanged, and no covert altercation occurred is necessary to synthesize the true story. What actually occurred was the meticulous balancing of safety, reputations, and egos in the intricate world of filmmaking. White's authenticity as a martial artist and Seagal's image as a rough man clashed, but only in the world of perception and criticism rather than in actuality. This is significant because it demonstrates how Hollywood narratives frequently focus more on what viewers wish to believe happened than on what actually occurred. Myths are used by both fans and critics to amuse themselves, to cast doubt on reputations, or to clarify the discrepancy between behavior on screen and behavior in real life. By carefully examining verified information and trustworthy sources, we can discover that the tale of Seagal and White is about reputations clashing rather than fists flying. How do you feel about Michael J. White and Steven Seagal's relationship? Do you believe they will ever be able to work things out? Leave a comment below with your opinions. For more fascinating tales about your favorite celebrities, don't forget to hit the notification button, like, and subscribe.